Hello, Jörg. Hello, Rana. Hello, Rada. Nice to see you in Spazio, even virtually. We meet today to have actually one of our first events in Chisinau dedicated to the topic of cultural wars, which is a topic which is part of a research project called it's a long name.
Contemporary art.
Yeah, maybe can you...
Contemporary art, popular culture, and peace building in Eastern Europe.
Thank you. And the program in Chisinau will consist of lectures, of workshops, and of a screening this month in May. Today we have a series of presentations. Next Saturday we invite you for a workshop to discuss related topics to what we learn from today. And also next Friday we will have a screening. So it goes together. And our program we call the Cultural Wars in Times of Polarization. So the question of polarization is what we try to deal with through our program. Polarization, which is created by different forces. And one of them is, of course, the military conflict, the ongoing war in Ukraine, but also other type of forces which can polarize society. So I'm really happy that we started. We will have this program this May. We will have an extension of it, hopefully in October, with more practical workshops, which we would like also to organize. So we don't want just to limit ourselves to theoretical discussions, but also to include practical workshops for artists, for cultural journalists, for cultural workers in general. And also next year, sometime in spring, we will be hosting a symposium, which will bring us there, but also other guests from different countries to speak on to present their research, basically, because again it's a research project which we will find out more today. So Rana, I will let you introduce your colleagues and the topics, and we can also ask some questions if we have in them. Thank you very much.
Yes, well, I'm going to introduce Rana and Jörg. So Rana is a researcher and theater scientist. I always forget what the word is. Who has a very varied background, both as a theater practitioner, but also working in many cultural initiatives and as a cultural manager. Working in Syria, Egypt, Berlin, and Zurich. And Rana is part of the CAS, which is advanced education format at the Zurich University of the Arts. And Rana works with the organization Artas Foundation, who are partners of this research project. Did I miss anything? No, good. And Jörg Scheller is the lead researcher of this project. Jörg is an art historian, certified bodybuilder, metal musician. Am I forgetting anything? Amongst other things. Jörg is head of the fine art, bachelor fine art. I forget, bachelor fine art department, master. No,
I used to be head of theory, but I moved to research. So that was like 2 years ago.
I'm sorry.
Now I am no longer head of anything.
Okay.
I'm
Well,
not even head of myself.
you're a lead researcher of this project and initiator. And Jörg has been working for a very long time in Poland at various institutions, but is also guest lecturer at the University of Poznan, University of the Arts in Poznan. And just as a side note, Jörg also has a metal delivery service called Malmzeit and is active in many spheres of popular culture. Yes, if I haven't missed anything, then I would like to hand over the word to you, Jörg, to introduce the research project in a little bit more detail.
Okay, thank you for the introduction and thanks for having us. It's always good to be back in Chisinau, even only in the virtual realm. I hope we can be back in the meet space pretty soon. So I will present the research project in general at first, and then I will give some insights into my sub-project, which concerns culture wars in Poland, and then I will hand over to Rada and Rana, who will present their sub-projects. No, Rada, you will also present, no? Yeah. So let me share my screen with you. Just a second. Okay. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. So as a general introduction, the name was already mentioned. The research project is about contemporary art, popular culture, and peace building in Eastern Europe. And the project started in 2022, and it will last until 2026. So I will read to you some lines from the abstract that we handed in to get the financing for this project, because I think it shows quite nicely what this is all about. So these are the objectives of the research project. In 3 sub-projects, project addresses the question of how art and popular culture in regions of Eastern Europe, that is Poland, Republic of Moldova, and Armenia, which have often been marginalized in Western discourses, respond to different types of conflicts, the culture wars in Poland, frozen conflict in Moldova, and the war in Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh. Especially in activism, art and popular culture are closely intertwined, and it is only in popular culture that peace building becomes broadly effective. So this is one of the reasons why we included popular culture in the research project, simply because if you want to have a broader outreach than to a purely artistic or purely academic community, the realm of the popular inevitably comes into play. Together with local partners, the project investigates how art and popular culture seek to contribute to peaceful conflict transformation using diverse methods from art, cultural and visual studies, qualitative sociological research, as well as artistic and action research. The researchers address the site-specific conditions and the different types of conflict. The results will be published, open access, synthesized by the project partner Artas Foundation, a practice-oriented manual, and displayed in a final presentation. Probably this is to be determined in an art institution in Zurich. And the project is funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation. And yes, I already said that, from 2022 through 2026. Now, when we talk about peace, it's important to define this very notion. And we define peace not as the absence of conflicts, but as the non-violent transformation of conflicts. So this is not about some like hippie ideal, like pure harmony or whatsoever. We understand peace as the non-violent negotiation, transformation of conflicts that you will always have, necessarily have, in a pluralist society. So there is no pluralist society without conflicts. Our focus is on implicit peace building. That is very crucial. So we focus on projects, on endeavors by independent individuals or groups that do not necessarily identify as peace building or as peace builders, but who contribute to creating conditions which make positive peace more likely, for instance, through making downplayed sources of conflict visible in the first place, or establishing non-partisan networks in civil society, or experimenting with fair modes of cooperation and exchange, etc., etc. So when we talk about positive peace, this means that we do not only talk about the absence of violence or the absence of war, but we talk about a society that kind of like creates like conditions under which peace is more likely to emerge. So this entails a broad range of activities, and activities that can also like not be peace building in a strict sense, but in a much broader sense. So as for our partners and the researchers, I am dealing with Poland, and I will present my subproject later. Rada is in charge of the Moldova subproject, and Rana is in charge of the Armenia subproject, and the Artas Foundation, as already mentioned, is our project partner, and such is the Oberlicht Association in Chisinau. There's a prehistory to this project, which I think is also important to mention, because it's actually a long history. So we started a series of excursions from the Zurich University of the Arts. We traveled through various Central Eastern European and Eastern European countries. Went to Poland, to Romania, to the Republic of Moldova, to Georgia, / Abkhazia, to Armenia. And our idea was really to bring our students to these regions where they would mostly not travel themselves. So their focus is usually elsewhere. And this we have been doing for roughly 10 years already. And through these excursions, we build a network in these countries and regions and cities. So, sometimes there's like these research projects who land somewhere like a UFO, and then the research project leaves again. So in this case, it's rather built on long-lasting, or say like organic partnerships. Then another part of this prehistory is my research on culture wars, social polarization, political polarization, and my research on the intersections of contemporary art and pop culture, avant pop in the broadest sense. So I'm very much interested in how, let's call it like progressive art, boundary pushing art and popular culture intersect. And I'm also very much interested in Eastern European art and culture. So I've been doing research on this and lecturing in Poznan for now also already 10 years. And last but not least, we have various activities in the field of arts and peace building, obviously by the Artas Foundation. And we also did various seminars at our university on art and peace building. First, it was only Dagmar Reichert, who was a founder or co-founder of the foundation, and then we joined forces, and then we did a couple of seminars together. So all of this kind of led up to this research project. All these activities fed into the design of the research project, if you like. So let me tell you a bit about my research on Poland and the contemporary culture wars which take place there. So my project focuses on roughly the 21st century. I do not deal with historical culture wars, but I focus on the present and how contemporary art, contemporary popular culture responds to this a kind of a conflict. What you see here is the graphic by Max Gorwider, an artist from Poznan who deals a lot with the various conflicting groups in Polish society and translates these conflicts into parodistic and satirical graphic design, drawings, cartoons, etc. So I use this as an introduction to show you maybe the heated atmosphere that has pervaded Poland for actually a long time now. So what do we talk about when we talk about culture wars? I would roughly define culture wars as conflicts that revolve around values, lifestyles, morals, ideologies that cannot be reduced to the distribution of material goods. So a culture war is, very roughly speaking, more about the abstract parts of our existence, if you like, and not so much about our basic or refined material needs. And when you look at Poland, you will see that actually the material conditions in the last 10, 20 years improved significantly. And still there is strong conflicts between right-wing conservatives, left-wing progressivists, liberals, etc. So this is the reason why I focus on culture wars. Here's a quote by Paweł Machcewicz, Polish art historian, who was the founding director of the Museum of the Second World War in Gdansk. And he got kicked out by the previous right-wing conservative government who tried to change the program of the museum towards a more nationalistic, patriotic narrative. And he argues that the long period of economic growth that followed the fall of communism, along with an accompanying rise in the standard of living for much of the population, remains unprecedented in the country's history. Poland has no financial oligarchy comparable to that of Russia or the wealthiest strata of EU society. And social inequalities are not any worse in Poland, generally speaking, than they are in other EU member states. Instead, it seems that cultural factors have been more important. That means more important for the so-called culture wars, social polarization, political polarization. Fatigued by modernization and unsettled by new patterns of life adopted from the West, it was the conservative majority in Poland, among whom the Catholic Church remains influential, that were instrumental. So this just as to substantiate or support my argument that the issues in Poland, conflicts, polarization, are not so much about the material issues. This also, I think, becomes plausible when you look at the development of the Gini index in Poland. So basically, that what is measurable in society, I'm very well aware that there are things that are not measurable and that cannot be put in statistics. But when you look at the Gini index, you can actually see that in the last 10 years, or the 10 years from 2004 to 2015, this is the time when the conservative nationalist government actually reigned with an absolute majority, that social inequality declined. So the conditions actually improved. So this means that culture wars, and I mean, this means for research that culture wars require a cultural perspective, and they need to be addressed on the cultural level. So if it is about culture, if it is about the more like abstract or symbolic aspects of life, then obviously you have to refer to these spheres rather than to the basic economic conditions only. And this led me to my research question, like how do artists in Poland respond to, how do they seek to transform the conflicts through art and culture? And I chose a very like down-to-earth empirical focus, namely I'm trying to map different approaches by different artists throughout Poland. I try to typologize them, so make like a list of different types of approaches, and then contextualize them and discuss them critically. So this is very much like the bottom line of my sub-project. And I will show you like 3 types that so far I have like observed in Poland. The first I would call organic work. This is a term from 19th century Poland, and it was developed after the series of failed uprisings. Like in the 19th century, like Poles would rise up again and again against Austria, against Prussia, and against Russia. So the partitioning powers who had conquered Poland in the 18th century, but they failed. They were simply not strong enough. They lacked resources. And this is when Polish intellectuals came up with the strategy of organic work, praca organiczna, which would mean if you lack the power for direct change, then you have to move in the direction of gradual improvement of economy and culture. And this was to pave the way for the restoration of the Polish nation. Like Poland did not exist between 1795 and 1918, when the circumstances were more favorable. And I think we can observe this praca organiczna, this organic work, in art and culture as well. So there are various projects that address the divisions in Polish society, and I will just show you a couple of them. For instance, from Zurich University, he's an architect from Poznan. He's now a member of the Sejm, so he became a politician and is now a member of parliament. But before this, he organized like happenings in the city of Poznan, where people would do like picnics on various squares in the city, or where he would organize gatherings where everybody could grab the mic and voice his or her opinion about issues, and everything was allowed. There was no like censorship. You were not allowed to use like strong language or insult somebody. And these events, they grew over the years. They became quite substantial, also in terms of numbers. And I think this could be one of the reasons why Poznan is a relatively peaceful city. You can actually see this in the cityscape. For instance, you have the Stonewall group quite openly active in the city. So like LGBT plus rights can be advocated without like somebody burning down your institution, which actually happens in Poland. So the idea here is to keep everybody in constant conversation, bring people together and make them realize that the other is actually a human being, which legitimate interests and with heart and soul and everything, and not just like an ideological abstraction that you encounter, for instance, on social media. So Franciszek Sterczewski, he explicitly situates his work and his approaches in the tradition of organic work. So he makes a direct reference. And Daniel Rycharski, quite interesting artist from the countryside in Poland. I already introduced his work last time when I lectured in Chisinau in Zemstvei. So he's a gay Christian artist who decided not to move to the big city where you have like safe spaces for LGBT plus people, but to go back to his home village and live and work there, like together with the local population, which is quite like Christian and conservative. And he also chose like this the path of like long gradual change. And he, for instance, produces artworks for the local population. This is a particularly funny one. It's a multimedia installation which works as a multimedia installation, but it is intended to fend off wild boars and birds. So it has a very practical use. Or he creates like these like surrealist sculptures made from the welded tools and agricultural machinery by the local peasants. Or he invited like gay people from the big cities to the countryside to work for the farmers for a while, because the farmers are lacking workforce. So they actually need they need like manpower over there. So he made like an exchange program, and like the gay people from the big city, they moved in with the farmers, spent a couple of works there, exchanged work for them, and so on. So again, this is not something that is intended to bring about immediate change or make like the conservative Catholic farmers, like super convinced supporters of LGBT rights. But it's like a step-by-step gradual change that he initiates, and he explicitly says that he's absolutely against violence whatsoever. He wants to bring about a change that is substantial and that is long-lasting. So here's a quote by Rycharski where he says, "I believe in the politics of small steps and starting a slow change. I don't want violence. I want to look for things that unite us rather than those that divide us. I want to show that dialogue and respect are possible." Now you can feel that there's some Christian flavor in there. The second type that I would like to briefly introduce, I would call agonistics. So a term coined by the philosopher Chantal Mouffe, who envisions, I quote, "an agonistic world order that acknowledges the diversity of forms of life and modes of organization. To be sure, such a world order will not bring eternal peace, but it will no doubt reduce the opportunities for antagonistic forms of confrontation." So she differentiates between antagonism, which is more about enemies, like an enemy, you will fight the enemy, whereas the agonistic means that you have maybe like opponents, and an opponent is a bit different from the enemy. It's not such a strong antagonism. So And Chantal Mouffe basically argues that in a pluralist society, you have to have conflict and you have to make conflict visible. And that is actually a precondition for peace, that conflicts can be discussed in the public openly. And therefore, you have to also use sometimes not violent strategies, but maybe like non-peaceful strategies. And here, I would subsume the work by Szymon Szymankiewicz, for instance. Szymon Szymankiewicz, he will visit Chisinau in autumn to give a workshop. He's a graphic artist from Poznan as well. And he creates artworks that create like strong controversy. They are widely discussed in the media, in the popular culture sphere. And they are quite direct and they are quite polemical. I would say here, for instance, you see a knife with the like the face of the leader of the right-wing conservative party, Peace, carved into it. And so Szymon Szymankiewicz is like through this work arguing that the party leader is responsible for violence. And this refers actually to the stabbing of the liberal mayor of Gdansk. So this mayor was killed during a public event. And so this is the background story to this work. So this is really intended to create controversy, to make conflicts open and tangible in the public. Or here, the black metal group Behemoth from Warsaw, they are also, I think, agonistic activists, always are trying to point to double standards by the Catholic Church, for instance. And for them also, it is not about having a nice little dialogue, but they tear, for instance, Bibles on stage. And for this, they actually got sued a couple of times. So time and again, the frontman, Adam Dowski, had to go to court. And he founded the Ordo Blasphemia, which is an advocacy organization, an NGO that supports likewise affected individuals and groups. So this is a direct outcome of this like agonistic practice that they follow. So yeah, this I would subsume under peace by non-peaceful means. And speaking with Mouffe, it's about the mobilization of common affects. So it's really about emotions in defense of equality and social justice. And this is not about creating like a populist polarization, but it is rather pointing to an existing polarization. And that I think is quite important difference. There are people who try to create divisions. Them I would call like the populists, and they are others who point to and reveal these divisions, who make them negotiable through their art, through their culture. And that I would say is a popular approach. Like I differentiate between populist and popular. Very roughly speaking, the populists divide, and those from popular culture, they offer spaces and opportunities where you can actually connect. The third one and the last one I would call positive hacking. And here, as an example, I would mention Jana Szostak. For instance, she also uses popular culture a lot in her work. For instance, she participated in beauty queen contests for many years. And she used the beauty queen contests and the stages that they offered her to address like social justice issues. So she kind of like subverted this these events. And she's currently producing a movie about her her activities in the beauty queen milieu. So this is an outtake. It's a short video work that was also shown in galleries. So you will have a film in the end, but there are outtakes which are shown in the art world. So it's not a clear division. And here she is standing as this beauty queen, as the Miss Peace, as she calls it. And Peace is the name of the former right-wing government of Poland. So she's kind of like solidarizing with the LGBT people from the Pride Parade, but as this like woman incorporating what the heteronormative beauty ideals. Or she's using regular media, mainstream media, social media to address very specific contemporary political issues. For instance, she was tired of like a minute of silence for the victims of violence, so she offered a minute of screaming for Belarus. So she stood behind the microphone and she screamed into the microphone for 1 minute. And that always made the news, and that was like widely clicked in the social media and so on. So based on this, we organized a symposium last year in Poznan. We brought together many of the artists, some of whom I mentioned now, and we video documented this and we'll make it available on the website quite soon. And as a preliminary conclusion from my observations in Poland, I think the strategy of organic work has actually proven to be maybe an efficient one, because as you probably all know, there is a new government in Poland. It's a coalition of various parties, the Greens, the Liberals, liberal conservative, left-wingers. So we have sort of like a popular front. And this, the new government actually, they refrained from populist strategies and used a non-violent rhetoric, try to combine like different forces. So they are very eager not to copy the violent methods of the previous government. And this turned out to be actually, yes, an efficient strategy. So I would say this is maybe a hint that the strategy of organic work is not the worst one when it comes to social polarization and culture wars. So that's it from my side. Rada, will you continue, or is it Rana?
I think Rana.
Rana, yeah. Perfect. Okay.
Thank you, Jörg, and good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for having us today. So as Jörg said when he started by presenting the bigger contemporary art, popular culture, and peacebuilding project, I'm working with Armenia. So, and as we called it, when the research proposal was sent to the funding was starting, basically we were speaking about during and post 2020 war, and it was the main questions of the research were formulated in terms of, now the war has ended, at least temporary, and we're studying post-war situation, but actually what happened that it didn't end, as you know, and now it continues. The research in Armenia continues working with political, human, and social and cultural changes that are happening very rapidly, and that's I would say a norm in regions in actual violent conflict. So, and this is kind of one of the main factors that determined the action research as a main methodology of this sub-project in Armenia. And by action research, it's meant to be a democratic and participative orientation to knowledge creation. So it's not about studying something, it's about studying with. It's not about people, it's with people, where it combines theory and practice, and it actually pursued and try to create actual solutions to issues of pressing concern for a certain community or in a certain context. This means that as a researcher and with collaboration with Armenian artists who are part of this or participating in this research, we have to deal, and they certainly have to deal with a lot of uncertainty and non-linearity in the way that we approach the research questions. So we are dealing with a with a changing context, and we accept this as part of the dynamic of our research. The collective learning process is very crucial in the sub-project Armenia. It is in its essence, and this is essentially a response to working in this uncertainty, where the tension between different truths and perspectives to realities cannot be handled except through collective learning, critical distance, and emotional implication. We need always to work against assumptions because changes are too high. We cannot. I urge as a researcher in this, I try to resist this urge to say, this is the solution, or this is what would work or not work, because we're experimenting. And throughout my presentation, you will see that creation of art spaces, art projects, workshops is very central in the work, and there is always time factor in the conclusions I reach. So every time I reach any kind of understanding or clear learning, I try to resist fixing it as a fact and a final conclusion of the research, although this is very tiring. I mean, it's I don't know how long I can do that, but for now it's still working. It's very important in this case also to use formal and informal techniques of research. So yes, I do interviews. Yes, I try to review art projects and try to write about them, or to do case studies, but the informal approaches are very important in this case. The side conversations that you try to capture, the struggle that you have with a group when you are trying to imagine the art project to implement next year. The side notes that when I'm planning with a colleague in Armenia, something that will happen at the beginning of 2026, and she is very enthusiastic about the idea, and her response would be, yes, of course, if the country still exists, then this is a great project, let's do it. So all of this is really a part of the learning within the Armenian sub-project. I will have to ask you, Rada, to interrupt me if I go too long.
All good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Control this tendency, please. As Rada said, I'm part of Artas Foundation, the Swiss Foundation for Art in Conflict Regions. Artas Foundation has been involved in the art and social transformation, or art and peace building more directly, in Armenia since 2018. And this research is a continuation of what was more focused on practice and now is combining practice with theory. So just an idea, we've started in 2018 with an art camp in Chambarach. I will not go into details in the projects, but they are all available also in more information about them on the website, or I can provide later if interested. And then we moved in 2019, 18-19 to doing the complaint choir, which is not an original idea. It has been done in many regions in the world, but we've done it in Abkhazia and Armenia, and then combined the two groups from the two regions together throughout the 2 years. And they called themselves We Are One Choir. And then Art Matters, it's an exchange project between Yerevan and Zurich. And this is an essential approach, very important, also still important in the research, the international cooperation. As I would say, as a practice, that's very powerful when people in a certain region have this huge feeling of isolation, of being non-seen, non-heard internationally, not taking the primary, the big headlines or the primary news item in news internationally, while they feel the suffer of going through war and conflict. So being isolated, being non-seen, non-heard, we approach a lot with international cooperation, and I'll speak about this later. Other projects, this is a poster exhibition about or focused on political posters, basically, that took place in Yerevan, but also in Zurich. Wishing Wishes, as you see here, the participants are more of young generation practicing wishing wishes through the art practices and specifically dance. We had artist talks and then art education and teachers training. Teachers, these are art teachers from different regions in Armenia that work together with Armenian and Swiss artists on teaching art in the system, in the school systems, but also elsewhere. I've started by explaining that this is very participatory and that it is about the practice as much as it is about the theory. And this is an exercise that I've done in my second visit to Yerevan, and it was in May 2023, last year. We organized a conference, a workshop and a conference. The conference was focused on art in uncertain times, and it gathered around 23 very established artists and organizations, art organizations and art groups leaders. And so we had a one-day, very in-depth conversation about what's the role of art and popular culture in peace building in Armenia. And at the very end of the conference, I told them, okay, I have one last question before we can go and have dinner is how this research could be meaningful for you. And it turned out to be a wish list of what's important for them, either in the research, but I guess also elsewhere, not directly connected to the research. But I took this very seriously as something that I check from time to time while going through the different stages of the work. For them, it will be meaningful if it gives concrete recommendations. What to do? What should we do? Very concretely, they spoke about how do we empower ourselves? How do we become more active? How do we So concrete, inner potentials of the sector. Be focused on the inner potentials of the sector or the country, and also invest and understand these potentials. The research for them should explain why there is no change in leadership in terms of generation. This is also, I don't know if I want to call this a conclusion, but one of the areas that I'm learning is about there is a huge question of generations in the art and institutional sector in Armenia. It is very important, and that's something I take very deeply, that it is for them important to connect to similar conflicts or to other regions that go through conflicts. So when we spoke about the international cooperation, they were very interested to connect to Europe, to other regions, but they were very specifically, and they have articulated the wish to be connected, and they are in certain ways, to be connected and being able to work together with artists from other conflict regions. The research for them should allow accessibility to contemporary art spaces. That's also another crisis in Yerevan, the lack of art spaces. It should preserve the regional history. And I interpreted that as respect of the history of the region, the cultural history maybe, but also the history of the conflict itself. It should be a space for dialogue and self-expressions. It should open opportunities to invest in culture in the region, and that's it. That reflects also on a third struggle of the sector, which are the financial resources that are allocated to the arts. One of the main areas that was shared by many participants in answering this question was that the research should offer an understanding of how society and politics see the role of the artist. Again, opening a relationship with different countries with conflicts and exploring relationship between artists and institutions. That also goes back to the fourth struggle in the country, which is the connection between art and civil society organizations. And there is a history here, and it is very much embedded in the peace-building processes, where a lot of the international funding went, and capacity building in Armenia went to NGOs, assuming that they will be the power leveraging peace-building negotiations, which as expressed by many of the people I interviewed or had conversation with, was a great failure and waste of money. So basically, this is not the objective of the research, but this is what the art sector in Armenia, represented by those 20 to 25 leaders in the sector, have expressed as wishes. So we are speaking about an ongoing conflict. And when we speak about the ongoing conflict, we go again to the idea of how we deal with this research as going side by side with the conflict. Here, I try to, through 3 slides, so very, very briefly, try to represent the 3 news that are on the headlines of all Armenian media this week. I'm speaking about this week, basically, so very recently. But in 1 week, there is this march from Tavush to Yerevan done by the Archbishop. I don't know if you heard about it, but it mobilized a huge demonstrations in the street, and it is challenging the actual government in Yerevan that's seen now as just, I mean, as expressed by a friend in Armenia, giving up. I mean, that it pretends, or it says in its narrative, that it is a government that's trying to reach peace, but they can't do that because they are weak, and weak people or countries don't reach peace. So the second thing is about the detainees in Azerbaijan and the new decisions that are made in courts there. And the third item, of course, is about the Karabakh Armenians who were displaced since September 2023, so last year, after the wide offensive of Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh that led to the influx of displaced people. Over 100,000 Armenian from Nagorno-Karabakh are now in Armenia, and there are projects of housing, project of government support to them, etc. But how is this evolving in the future is a different question. I'm sorry, I'm having to go back to my slides to see where to go. Yeah. Basically, I will go to the last slide, or last part of the slides. 3 main visits took place in the framework of the research. The first one was an introductory and kind of trying to in a preparation for the symposium, or for the conference and workshop that took place a few months later. That was in January 23, through which I started connecting to organizations and artists in Yerevan mainly. And these are kind of very informal walks that I've done. Oops, sorry. This is, do you see the video? Sound?
You mean if it's playing?
Do you hear the sound?
No.
Yeah. Okay, great. This is part of our work that took place in May, and it was with artists and authors, exploring what makes sense for the art, how the arts could be engaged in peaceful social transformation. One of the main learnings in this workshop and the conference that followed it is be very careful when you speak about peace building. So here comes again the idea of implicit peace building that Jörg presented at the beginning as one of the core concepts in the 3 sub-projects, I think. In Armenia in particular, when we're going through the conflict, or in time of violent conflict and armed conflict, it's very hard to speak about peace building. It's the moment that you bring the term, not the topic, the moment that you bring the term to the room, you will be faced by silence. And here I want to stop at this point and use one of the findings of a research called Why Ideas Matter, Exploring the Potential and Limits of Local Civil Society Agency in Peacebuilding. This research was conducted by Socioscope, a social and political research center in Yerevan. Neoliberal ideology, linking peace with democracy. This shift led to increased involvement of international organizations, displacing smaller grassroots initiatives as the primary actors in the peace process. It is one of the possible interpretations for why peace building is not to be spoken about explicitly now in Yerevan, is because when you say peace building, it means for them the formal UN mediation processes, neoliberal approaches that is not kind of growing more genuinely from bottom up. While when you go more in informal conversation and you tell them what you understand by peace building, they tell you, then okay, then you are not telling me come bring one artist from here and one artist from there and put them in a room together and then the world will be rosy again. If you don't mean this, then we're all right, we'll work with you. So that's also one of the understandings that I could build. We have been in conversation with different artists about how can art make all the difficult social and political situation more bearable. How can it be meaningful in that sense? And that's one of the questions that we are exploring. And one of the answers, I'm sorry for not having a good picture, but we are creating a project called The Living Room. The Living Room project is a project created within the research project and also as part of Artas Foundation projects. And it is our response to the displacement of over 100,000 Armenian from Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia, to Yerevan, to Armenia, not to Yerevan, sorry. And the living room is a space where this is the space on the left side, and this is the street that leads to it on the right side. In Yerevan, it's very peripheral, not central, and everyone tells us, be careful, because if you are not in the middle of Yerevan, in the center of the hippie-hoppy part of the city, it will be difficult, but we are very confident that we need to be in the periphery where more refugees are based. And the living room is practically, as I told you, I mean, the day after the displacement of people from Nagorno-Karabakh, we've started consulting with artists in Armenia, but also with colleagues in Artas Foundation. What do we do now? Should we just carry on what we used to do, or what we started before, or what we planned even? Or should we revisit our plans? And we decided to, of course, shift what we have in our plans. And we found our living room, which is supposed to be a connecting space for displaced communities from Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenian and international artists working together in varied social and artistic forms to encourage those who have lost their homes to resist a permanent self-identification as victims. That was the main spark of the idea. Or we had two sparking areas. The victim situation, the victim identity of displaced people, and the international cooperation. And I go back again to the isolation that colleagues in Armenia feel. So it will be a space where displaced communities who are now hosted either less with time, but at the beginning they were in hotels or in government prepared spaces to host them. Now more and more they are renting apartments or still hosted by family members. But this feeling, I don't know if any of you in the room lived somewhere else and personally, individually experience being hosted all the time and not feeling in your home, and so not feeling the host, the power of being the host, of being offering the food, offering the space, offering the music. And this living room should be booked by families to do birthday celebrations, and to have family dinners, cultural fests and religious fests, whatever they host in their actual homes or in their homes, they can host here. But also we're now launching in 1 week, we're launching the call for participation for a laboratory around art and social transformation. We are also planning in January 2025 a dance project with a Finnish choreographer who works with people who lost the sense of control of their lives to be the lead of themselves, of other dancers, and of the publicum, of the audience, for one song. So for one song, they practice and then they lead people and they lead themselves and their bodies through the song. So this is very recently what we are doing. At the same time, and unfortunately, I'm still not allowed to quote a lot because many of the interviews that I've done are still not, I didn't have the final consent of the interviewee. But one of the things that I heard recently from an art historian, and not only from him, but I can argue with and against this statement from different conversations and readings, is that contemporary art has failed. And it was very harsh even to hear it. Contemporary art in Armenia has failed to be meaningful for Armenia. So I can't quote, but later I can do that. I can communicate more, but it's an art historian basically who was raised in Canada, but then moved to Armenia, and he's Armenian. One of the learnings that I reached up till now is that, as I told you before, international cooperation is crucial. Not only because it counter this feeling of isolation and being non-relevant to the world, but also because it gives, as also very beautifully phrased by an Armenian curator, it gives the space for identity comparison, where you don't you understand yourself through the understanding of the others. One of the open questions is still about, sorry, I will make this bigger. I now realize that it's small and yeah. That there is a lot of internal challenges in the art sector in Armenia that prevents or makes it very hard for artists to actually be strongly engaged. One of them, some of them are very practical, like political reforms that are necessary so that they can act freely. There are economic and space infrastructure related challenges. There is a question of institutions, art institutions, and how they can mobilize the sector, or open spaces or open doors for artists to be more active. And there is a huge need for, as I understand it now, is to kind of work on the culture of peace building in the region, is to shift this immediate understanding of peace building from the neoliberal approach to more grassroots approach, if I can call it this way. Dialogue is something that we can't, I mean, one of the big questions, open questions that I wanted to conclude with is, what about art in peace mediations? In the case, not in general, theoretically it's hard, but even more maybe in the case of Armenia, I am looking for examples of art in mediation, informal mediation processes, how the art could be influential in that term, because here we are speaking about actual war situation, and mediation at the end, now or later, will continue. So how can the art be prepared? Kind of, how can we study possibilities and limitations of the art in mediation, in official mediation processes? And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rana. So I will, unless there are any acute questions right now, I will carry on, with my presentation. I have to come a bit closer because of the microphone. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Arrange you. Do you see the presentation? Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I'll leave it like this. Okay, so about the subproject in Moldova. Sorry. This. No. So firstly, I will speak a bit about the research outcomes, and so like how the research will look once the project is completed. So first of all, there will be a written thesis summarizing the learnings of these 4 years. The method that I'm using is artistic research, so there will be both a written part, but also an artistic part. In addition to this, we're working on a publication with Oberlicht, which will take the form of a website summarizing the last approximately 10 years of activities of Oberlicht. The focus of the Moldovan sub-project was, when we started, we spoke mainly about the 1992 secession war in Transnistria, which is a frozen conflict. But it's, of course, very much interlinked with other conflicts in Moldovan society. So these will be addressed as well. Hi. The research methods that I've been using is basically, I've had, I think, 4 or 5 research trips over the last 1.5 years of various durations, coming to Chisinau, but also visiting other regions in the country. I have been observing and participating in various cultural activities. And I have been conducting interviews with cultural actors, activists, artists, and so on. I've also attempted to understand, or to, as an outsider, kind of visualize and create for myself an understanding of which cultural initiatives are active in the region, what is their relationship to one another, which spheres or which types of conflicts are they addressing. And I have been gathering material and reading articles on relevant topics. It has to be said here that there is very little writing on contemporary art in Moldova. So when it is mentioned, it's usually mentioned like either alongside Romania or sometimes not at all. So there are like a few individual artists which appear in some anthologies, but like as a general overview, there is very little. And in addition to this, I've been recording mostly audio material. The areas of research, firstly, is an understanding of the development of Oberlicht's activities in the Transnistrian region. So since in the last 20 years of Oberlicht's activities, there have been various projects with Transnistria, some of which you can see in this room here behind us later in the exhibition. So like the older ones, but also the more recent ones. Trying to understand how is the conflict spoken about and by whom. if at all. And so far, my understanding has been that the Transnistrian conflict has been maybe obviously more pressing for artists who are from the Transnistrian region. For younger artists who are not from the Transnistrian region, it is there as sort of like a background, I don't know, like a background noise that is there. But unless I specifically ask them about what role this conflict plays in their artwork, it hasn't, like it's not the first conflict that they will speak about. Thirdly, the impact of the war in Ukraine on the independent art scene has also been a major topic of the research, not just because of Oberlicht's activities of hosting Ukrainian artists throughout the first year of the war, but also because of various other initiatives which engaged very much with refugees. Yes, so this, as an example, was last year, the Ukraine Month in Europe. I don't know, some of you, I think, weren't here for it, but this was like a month-long series of events and screenings which spoke about the war. In terms of other initiatives, just as an example, I've listed here an initiative by Rusanda Kurka, who is a Moldovan artist who works between Chisinau and Hertop, the village where she's from. And when the war started, Rusanda started launched an initiative to make space for refugees in houses that have been left behind in her village by people who emigrated from the region. So she acted very quickly with the help of people from the village to provide the necessities and host refugees. And she also set up artistic programs for children, especially. In the following, I will speak about three methods. That's just a selection of methods that have been used by local artists. The first is self-institutionalization. The second is engaging with public space. And the third is friendship networks. In terms of self-institutionalization, there is sort of a longer tradition in Eastern Europe of this practice, and it relates to, basically it's a solution to creating art institutions where they are either lacking or not available, or whether they are insufficient, inaccessible for various reasons. So I think especially like in the 80s and 90s, there was almost like a trend of calling oneself the museum of, the ministry of, the institute of so-and-so, but being a very informal institution. So as an example here, and there are many others, I've listed Oberlicht, the Coalition of Independent Cultural Workers in Moldova, and Artas, which is like kind of the umbrella institution of the example that I showed you before of Rusanda Kurka. In terms of engaging with public space, there are a lot of activities by Oberlicht, so many that yeah, I don't even know where to start, but I think I would list the open apartment, which the open flat space here in Chisinau as one of those which have been active for a very long time and where a lot of activities have taken place. And where this ongoing discussion of public space and its availability to the public and what is done with it other than parking one's car has been very prevalent. But I would also count initiatives such as the one which recently has also been quite active, Stadionul este Republican, so talking about the Republican Stadium in Chisinau, the area of which is sold now or is in the process of being sold to the American embassy, which say they will create a park there, but then the question is like, who will this park be accessible for? And also the practice of demonstrating in the city center for various issues. I would add to this also the engagement with not just public space, but also public infrastructure. And as an example for this, I did some research on the houses of cultures, which Moldova has many of. So basically every village of a certain size used to have a house of culture where a lot of events used to take place, all sorts of theater performances, music, and so on. And since the independence, these houses of cultures have basically been left in various states of disrepair. Some of them have continued to be very much used by the local population and are still in very good upkeep, but this is not the case everywhere. Some have been used for storage, and there have even been reports that some use them as stables to put animals in. So yeah, I think this is also this infrastructure which is incredibly valuable and which has so much potential, but of course due to the lack of resources, but also to the lack of engagement, it has kind of been left behind. In regards to this engagement with public space, I would also add something which a lot of artists told me, that it was important for them for these spaces to actually exist in order to visualize what is possible. So people said, hey, I knew that some things like this exist in Western Europe, but I didn't think it's possible in our region until I saw that there is an exhibition, there is this off space, there is this happening. So I think this function as being an example which really exists in real life has been very important. And the final method which I wanted to address is the importance of friendship networks. So yesterday we had sort of a longer discussion about informal, formal spaces and their role in this independent scene. And there has been, there has been a lot also written and trying to formalize these informal spaces and friendship networks. And on the one hand, they are very quick, I would say, to react to challenges. They also create networks beyond institutions, so you don't need to rely on an institution, but you can be like, hey, I'm friends with this person and this person, we have a mutual interest, let's do something together. What I found really interesting in the case of Moldova is that a lot of people had networks in Odessa, for example, which now, after the war in Ukraine started, kind of became less accessible. So a lot of artists shifted their focus more towards Chisinau. Yeah. On the other hand, I would also like to note that there are limitations to these friendship networks, so they rely on good personal relations, and they also hinge on individual actors. So sometimes if one person leaves the country, for example, which is very often the case in Moldova, then the question is like, okay, but what will happen with this very informal situation? Okay, so in terms of culture wars, when I started this research, I was kind of under the assumption that Moldova was not so polarized, or at least not as much as, for example, Poland. But in the meantime, I've kind of had to change my opinion on that a little bit. I've had multiple people that I interviewed say that they really deplore that there is this polarization between a more, let's say, Russian-leaning sphere of influence and the more European/Romanian-oriented sphere of influence, and that there is very little conversation between the two, and there are also very little spaces where this conversation can actually take place. And a lot of people explicitly mentioned the lack of third spaces, which there is a third space here in Zemstvei, but of other third spaces where conversation can be had outside of just these two positions. And another thing, yeah, people also said that it's difficult at the moment to be critical of the European Union because Moldova relies so much on funding coming from Western European countries, and with its road to European Union membership, people are very cautious of exercising criticism. So this is it from my side. I don't know if you want to take a break or if we should open for questions. If you want to ask questions, you have to come here and speak into the microphone here.
Thank you very much, Rada.
You're welcome.
Before we go through the questions, thank you all for very interesting inputs to this, for opening this discussion actually on the cultural wars, polarization, and what kind of examples you bring from Poland, Armenia. It's a question for us also to think what forms of polarization and divisions we find in our local context. And I hope we have first of all awakened the interest in you to speak, to think about it, and our role now is to create space to continue this discussion. From my perspective, what was important to learn today from your presentation is that you have specific methodologies which you apply, and that is not obvious in our artistic work, which of course has its own methodology, but it's different when our work is being analyzed through other tools of a researcher or someone who observes how we work as artists or cultural workers here locally. So I think that's kind of interesting to observe what tools you use and how you approach the artistic life and communities in these cities. And thank you, Jörg, for saying also that it's not a parachuted research, but it took us basically 10 years to build relations, and we are now in a more kind of already more professional, I would say, relation, which turns sometimes also into friendship, and it allows a more in-depth analysis to take place of the processes, local processes. So it's important to say that we know each other for many years already. What happens now is more like I don't know, it's like a co-living situation, because it lasts already years, but also it brings this professional perspective on our work, on ourselves as artists and cultural community. Yeah, I just wanted to comment very quickly on this part. I'm I really surprised how deep your work is in Yerevan. It's very great to see what, Rana, you are doing there. We are not in a, we passed through the conflict situation in '92, and now we are not in a direct conflict involved here. So I think our concerns locally is more related to the need for mediation, which you mentioned, of something that happened 30 years ago, but still is not cured, is not resolved. So I'm really interested in what will be your findings of your research from this perspective. Although, as you mentioned, it's kind of very difficult to do any kind of mediation right now, because it's it's still not clear what will happen next in the future. But I wanted to say that beyond mediation, I think what we could think here locally more in Moldova would be about prevention or anticipating a war to happen. So I think this is much more kind of relevant today, also in the context of the conflict and the war in Ukraine. So what can be done us as artists, as artistic community, to anticipate this kind of military development in our country? So I think this is like a question, I don't know, we could try to address it during our next week meeting in the frame of a workshop, which we would like to see you also joining next Saturday. What can we do about that? It was mentioned that in our past events, we were talking about the fact that the state cultural policy that we have today in Moldova, but also that Ukraine has, and of course that is in Russia, this kind of cultural policy and the institutional architecture, like the cultural institutions, it couldn't prevent this war from happening. So that's one starting point, maybe, to think about in the role of independent culture, independent artists that could create different models of institutional models. And the question of self-institutionalization was also pointed by Rada in this case. I think it's related. What kind of alternative cultural institutions can we create that would actually prevent or anticipate and prevent this type of wars to happen in the future? And so I think this is like one of these questions to think about. And it's interesting to learn that contemporary art failed in Armenia, and that is another kind of more radical perspective on the role of contemporary art, but maybe it's also valid question, like the contemporary art that we produce today, what can it create actually, if in the situation of Armenia, it's regarded as a failure, basically. So that do we reproduce it? But it's interesting to learn, of course, about the specific context in which it was used in this discussion to understand better. Because here, contemporary art is, of course, perceived a more, how to say, progressive, right? And something that would fight the traditional understanding of life and I mean patriarchy and all this stuff. So contemporary art is seen as something that is actually creating a different, proposing an alternative to that. And we sort of, we are sorry that we lack institutions which deal with contemporary art, like contemporary art centers or museums we don't even think about because it's too luxury to think about something like that. But let's say at least to have some publicly funded contemporary art institutions, which we still don't have. So yeah, this is like very quick feedback, just not to let the room freeze, but I'm sure there are many interesting ideas which came to your mind. So just take a seat and maybe you can ask a question to our colleagues, researchers. I think it's very unique project in that sense. I don't think, I mean, there are local researchers going on about fine arts. That's what we would find usually, like art historians learning about an artist or about an artistic period, be it related to Soviet Moldova or contemporary period. But we probably first time witness a project which researches on art, but also in society, and like stressing a lot the role of art in society. So I think that is very valuable, and thank you for doing this work and inviting us to become a part of this research.
Maybe can I just maybe just like a quick feedback to the feedback regarding like the failure of contemporary art. So when we look at Poland, I think there the situation is different because in many regards, contemporary art was and is quite successful. First of all, Poland has developed a pretty stable contemporary art scene and institutions and discourses with affiliated magazines and so on and so on. But it is also closely connected to civil movements. And that I think is quite crucial. So when you think, for instance, about Szymon Szymankiewicz, whom I briefly introduced, so he is an artist, he works at the Art University, he's presenting his stuff in the context of institutional art. But he, for instance, was the one who created the logo for the women's strike in Poland. So he's working both sides. And he's present in popular culture, but he's also present in the more academic sector. And I think this is something that makes art or contemporary art, say, like effective when it comes to social issues. And in Poland, you have this tradition of the Solidarność movement. So this big labor union that had its peak in the 1980s. And I think what they managed to do is really to create a popular front So including diverse groups, even I would say like antagonistic groups. So you had people from the church, you have like atheists and liberals, and they somehow managed to collaborate. I mean, in the end, they also fell apart, and they were again like divisions as soon as like the common enemy, the Soviet Union, like went down the drain. It became harder to collaborate. But I still think that this is a model that is quite promising. So this interconnectedness and these interrelationships, but in this regard, obviously, you also need the institutional side. So you need some sort of like funding, you need the academic discourse, you need the backup from time to time from a city government, and so on and so on. And here I just returned from the Polish-Russian, Belarusian, Lithuanian border region, where I spent some time exploring the Borderland Foundation, which is doing like dialogue and peace building projects in these like in the borderland region across various nations, cultures, and religions. And there, one of the findings that I got is that the foundation was actually quite lucky to receive funding from the local government, because they did some quite controversial projects, but nobody could reproach them with like being Western agents or with like following foreign interests. So they somehow convinced more like a conservative local government to fund them. They do not only do progressive stuff or radical stuff, but they also care for local traditions. They care for like local like folklore stuff. So they don't follow this path of like the purely progressivist agenda, if you like. And that for them turned out to be a quite efficient way of actually bringing about a change. So it was not against the locals and their traditions, but they tried to really include it, and again, with this organic work perspective, and slowly transform. So the local funding was crucial for them, not going against the grain of the local traditions, but somehow trying to include them and work with them, and having a long-term like agenda. So not trying to bring about immediate change. And yeah, so this may be just as also like as a positive example how contemporary art can actually prove to be quite effectful in this regard, but it needs to be connected to broader movements, I think. I'm saying this because I have to leave around 7. So if there are like more if there are questions or whatsoever that I could or should answer, then now would be the right time to ask them.
Then I will jump in again. But I mean, you actually mentioned, you answered on my question. I had this question also, we tried to discuss it before, how in this work of preventing polarization, how to, I mean, if we speak of contemporary art as a tool, and especially artists who use activist approach, right? They are pointing from your presentation, of course, they are pointing to an issue, but they also create polarization by bringing in a very sometimes radical, on one hand, doing it with radical approach, but on the other hand, bringing some topics which maybe are not spoken, and society tries to go around it and not to include in the agenda. And then, I mean, now I understand, I find it in your spectrum of approaches. It's one of the approaches how to contribute to a better understanding, basically, of the situation. But maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, I think processuality is key here. So focus, like process-oriented approaches, because this resonates, I think, quite strongly with what Rana said. If you put a clear aim, like peace, or if you point to a clear state that you want to achieve, then you create also sort of like an immense pressure from time to time. And many people, especially when it comes to regions in crisis, they know that this is utopian. It will not happen. So you won't achieve this aim. But what you can achieve is setting a process in motion and establishing certain ways of dealing with issues in a long-term perspective. And I think these processes, they also contribute to making societies more resilient and less polarized in the long run. So if we talk about processes, I think it's less frustrating than talking about finality or like the aim, like in project management, you need to reach that milestone within, like 2 years or whatsoever. That creates a lot of frustration. But really focusing on establishing processes, on establishing modes of dialogue and so on, as this Borderland Foundation has been doing now for a couple of decades. They started in the 1990s. And they're really established in rural Poland, so in tiny villages, in a very conservative region. And they somehow managed to get the funding from the local government by, for instance, like the head of the foundation actually moved to that region. He built his house there, also as a gesture of, I'm not like this UFO that is landing here. I'm becoming part of this. I'm committing to this region, and so on. So all of this contributed, I think, to creating like strong social bonds and trust, because trust only emerges over long periods of time. So you cannot create this United Nations style with a 1-year project or whatsoever. So process orientation, I think, is really crucial. Yeah. And at this point, I fear I have to leave because I have to prepare for a short trip with my godchildren.
Thank you for being here and taking the time.
Sure.
And Rana, I think you raised your hand. Maybe we can.
Okay, so I say bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Yes, it was actually a contribution of what Jörg was saying. I think I don't know if we can prevent polarization or as cultural and art institutions, if we're speaking about institutions, or should we focus on preparing ourselves for what we know is coming, if we see them coming? And by preparing ourselves, I think we need to equip players and starting by understanding the potential polarization and cultural wars that are coming, or the big fractions in the cohesion that we wish we could have, and preparing tools, very pragmatic way of preparing ourselves to what's coming. And I think it's kind of if we know that there are better ways than fighting, we might not fight. So if we have the tools not to fight, we might not fight, even if we disagree. So tools, that means institutional tools, that mean also societal tools, and I could give examples of that, but basically there are the structural way of preparing a society in terms of having the infrastructure ready to contain these, train people who needs to be trained in leading dialogue processes, etc. And there are the softer way where the arts come in, and that's all laying the ground to dealing or to quickly be able to respond to the to the changes or to the unwanted changes that we are seeing coming.
I think I would also add to this that it's a question of like the size of organizations. So what I've been seeing a lot in Moldova is that especially like these quite informal art collectives or groups are very local, they're very particular, they deal with very particular issues and are not oriented towards these big goals. Like you said, Rana, we have to prevent war from happening, but I do agree, like we can anticipate it, but it's also maybe a question like how these smaller units organize amongst each other, because I think they're very effective at doing what they do in their particularity. But when it comes to bigger issues, you need different structures. And then it's the question of what kind of institutions you need. And yeah, you wanted to...
No, I mean, it's good you took over. I had just a quick comment that we can anticipate things, and that is what, so more work should be dedicated to this process of anticipating a potential conflict or something that can come in the future. And actually, one of the questions here is, of course, that society is polarized between East and West, Russia, European Union, and then we even have this very progressive theater putting place about migrant workers from Moldova in European Union and how unequal, what kind of other inequalities Moldovans have to face additionally to the ones like we faced already. So actually, like the question of European Union is interesting to me because we have Romania very close, and just by looking into Romania, we can also learn about processes which will happen very soon here. So this work of anticipating is actually very important. But again, what kind of tools do we have to anticipate these processes from happening here, this or that process from happening? But it's interesting. I mean, I don't know if we need institutions in this case, but more like a way to look around. So maybe this be part of more international networks or be present like in a more global scale, participating in different processes could be something that would inform us locally about those processes. And that is something to think about. Basically, yeah, as small institutions, we can become part of a research project or become a part of a network which deals with topics, that kind of topics. But I agree that we need different institutions which will connect grassroots initiatives, and that is one question to still to think about. What kind of structures could those be? I see at least here this is kind of reluctant for initiatives to join a more formal way or self-organize in a more formal way in order to maybe solve some problem or find resources to solve the problem. You mentioned coalition, and it's kind of maybe one of the first attempts to build some kind of relations in a more formal way that would put us in front of each other and in front of a problem. But maybe that's the way to go, and maybe not one coalition is not enough. We need just more coalitions, and that can work on different principles. If one coalition is not satisfying your needs as a grassroots initiative, then there could be another coalition. But again, this formality is at some point is needed. Otherwise, you cannot build relations with bigger actors locally and internationally. And that is another thing. I mean, we have a lot of grassroots initiatives which are not even NGOs. And like there is even that kind of step which needs to happen first, that they formalize themselves first before joining more kind of bigger structure.
Just very, very quick comment. I don't want to take more time on this, but I mean, the institutional conversation in that term, when you're speaking about uncertain regions or uncertain phases with direct or indirect conflict, with divisions in the societies, etc., the institutional questions become really a priority. But I think unconventional, but that's a personal opinion based on practical experience, and also partly reviewing certain regions' experiences. In many cases, formalities and formalizing or institutionalizing of the sector is seen as a positive thing, while it is in reality a hindrance for the sector to genuinely and in a grassroots approach be able to stay agile as it started, and be able to retransform when necessary, when the political situation changes or there is a need to reconfigure themselves. Yeah, I was a great supporter of institutionalizing of initiatives and grassroots initiatives, and with time I learned maybe it's not always the right answer. Sometimes the informal setting of those initiatives and groups and collectives is their power, and they lose a lot when they insert. So it's an unresolved question for me. It's very context or site specific. It depends on the institutional culture in the region. It depends on the history, the level of knowledge in the sector, the dynamics, the funding possibilities. So there are a lot of reasons to consider or not to consider institutionalization of a sector.
Thank you. Great answer.
Were there questions or comments? I think I saw. Maybe I'll get the lights as well. If you have time, Rana, because I know we already are past the agreed.
No, it's fine. We have a few moments.
Thank you for the presentation, and it was interesting to hear what your thoughts. And I'm curious to ask. I want to ask two questions. I don't know if it's relevant at all and to your research, but I'm curious about if you have any thoughts on how to fight misinformation and conspiracy theories, as this is kind of part of this populist techniques for dividing society, and also if you have any thoughts on climate change as a driver of conflicts, and this how to address it, and if there is maybe a lack of this concentration on this topic in the art scene, and at least in the Eastern Europe or.
Can you sorry, can you repeat the second part of the question? Because I think Rana couldn't.
I can hear it.
hear.
Okay, I'm sorry. So the microphone is quite bad.
No, the connection.
The
I
connection.
yeah.
Oh, my question is regarding
Climate.
the climate change as a driver, both of as an intensifier of existing conflicts, and also as a event that in itself causes a lot of division, refugees, and if you have any thoughts, maybe how, because I feel like there is a lack of this talking about this topic in Eastern European kind of scene, art scene, and civil society scene, and maybe this is related to your topic of this lack of feeling connected to the rest of the world and feeling disconnected, and kind of this lack of global thinking. And
thank you so much. I think I captured the question also with the help of Rada typing it in the chat. I'll try to answer as much as I could get from it. What could be effective in fighting disinformation, populist fake news, etc.? So the first part of your question, I think we speak a lot about building trust within communities that are either manipulated by fake news or under pressure of different influences with different political interests or social interests in a region. And I think there is a great deal of creating platforms that could basically be strongly, and here I go back to when Jörg spoken about the popular culture, and because it is compared to contemporary art or of the assumptions, it is powerful into reaching out of the closed circles that we find in our regions of people who go to exhibitions, who go to lectures, etc. So those who are from the close, small circle of audience or receivers of contemporary art, I think one of the important tools is to go to more of popular culture field, and creating platforms, but focused on widespread and trust building. And here trust would mean to do the very hard exercise of not to be politically affiliated to one of the conflicting parties in the struggle. So here comes one of the basics that we use also when we speak about neutrality. And me personally, I have very hard time in saying that anything is neutral. But if we're speaking about news platforms, art institutions, neutrality could somehow be a base of departure. It's not the end, but it's a base of departure for creating trusted platforms to counterpoint the disinformation that is spread. Also using the same tools that this populist fake news use, which is not only restricted to, but social media. I mean, we all do that in everyday life. So it's not something very creative to say, but I mean, go to the widest and most grassroots approach to counterpoint them. When we speak about climate change, that's a whole layer of inequalities and again, confirming again the centers in the world and the margins in the world. I mean, I was just a couple of weeks ago in a Stockholm Forum for Development and Peace, and one of the most controversial topics that were discussed was climate change, and who are the actors who put a focus on climate change as part of the either reasons for conflict or peace building processes. And here I have to stress that I'm not surprised that it's not spoken about in Eastern Europe, for example, a lot. I mean, it's not one of the main topics. It's the same also in the Arab regions. It's the same in, I think, regions that have been dealing for years or decades, even with conflicts or wars or revolutions or civil wars, where the attention is shifted somewhere else, and climate change is seen as a luxurious question, unfortunately, in the populist culture. Let me put it like this. Also, it is in many cases, if we speak about on a policy level, it's in many cases used to shift the focus of the institutions and the players in the country from local questions and very burning societal questions. So there is a negative reaction because of political use of the climate change question. I think this also partly answers why it's not so present in certain regions. How to, we need to understand, I mean, that's a whole field of research and practice that needs to be kind of not only examined, but also questioned in terms of cross-discipline approach. If we speak about art and climate change and peace building, now we are speaking about 3 sectors, 3 fields, which make the creating processes much more difficult. Not saying it's not possible. There are many creative ways of doing that that we can study. But yeah, it's crossing fields that are not easily integrated in one approach of peace building. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
That's great. I agree with the use of popular media, social media, and so on to create more interest in attention towards disinformation. And so thank you for your thoughts in general. Thank you.
If there are no more questions, I don't know, is questions? Thank you so much. You have, okay.
For you.
For me, yes.
Maybe if there is no questions for me,
Exactly. So if you don't have any more questions for Rana, then I would thank you very much for your participation and the presentation and your time. Yeah.
And we hope to see you in person
Yes.
soon in Chisinau.
I really look forward to being there in the room with you sometime soon. Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone, and was happy to be there.
Bye. Take care.
Yeah, my question is, again, it's more general, I think, and if Rada, beyond the Transnistrian conflict, which happened in 92, which would be the topics which you think polarize the most our society, Moldovan society.
Mhm.
If you have any kind of, if you have a feeling for that or for that or for that.
I have a bit, but I also have to say it's a bit limited because I mostly read like Russian language media, and I've only very recently started learning Romanian, so this also kind of influences my view. But just like off the top of my head, it's discrimination against minorities, I think is like a big topic. For example, the role of LGBTQ people, and now with, you know, joining Europe, which is going to be like a very important part, I think, is one thing. Another thing, which I don't know if it's really polarizing, but more like a question of agency, I would say, and what agency is there for locals. And I think a lot of time agency, or a lot of people find their agency more abroad. A lot of people move away, so there's like this question of depopulation. And on the one hand, of course, nobody can blame them. Those are like the material realities. But it's also like a question of like who, or like how to solve this, how to address this, who is to solve this. And in my perception, please correct me if I'm wrong, some people have also like disengaged a bit from these questions. So it's like, okay, we've been trying to solve these questions and address these questions in some cases since independence, and some have progressed a little bit and some haven't. And I think as a result, people tend to also like withdraw a little bit from having these discussions. Yeah, I think the role of Russia is another like really big topic, which of course is connected to the Transnistrian conflict, but there also like I've heard like the wildest different opinions, from saying things like, oh, every Russian speaker in Moldova is completely brainwashed, and, you know, like to like another side saying, no, but we have to keep like good connections with Russia. So I think, yeah, this is also like a very, very much polarizing topic. Yeah, I think like in the, when was it, 2 weeks ago, this 9th of May victory parade, there was like this remembrance parade with people, you know, having pictures of their relatives that died in World War II or the Afghanistan war. And there was one guy yelling, Slava Ukraini, you're all fascists, you're all fascists. And it's also like this, you know, what does it mean anymore to call someone a fascist? Because it's like anyone is calling the other party a fascist. And so, you know, so it's like also like what do words mean anymore? Yeah, and yeah, and like on the one hand, I was like, yeah, I understand like his support for Ukraine and the Ukrainian cause, but it was also like so, I don't know, you know. Yeah, but maybe you have things to add, or
Actually, it's a good maybe question to all of us. If you have your thoughts on what polarizes Moldovan society to a bigger kind, maybe we can already start putting them on paper, just because we would like to meet again you and other people who want to join next Saturday and talk a little bit more in depth on these topics. So maybe we can put them already now on paper and email them in advance so people can think about it. And if you have any suggestions. The climate change is one of them, right? Which is not so present, but you would like it to be more.
Although it's more like it's not yet
or was it Hungary, or not Hungary, it was in the United States, they passed a law to exclude climate change from the state. So something I don't know too much about this. The state is not one particular state is not allowed to do the word climate change in the state there. So kind of like removing removing this idea that this like. But I'm talking about the community race on Europe's way. I when I want to do the press sad about the future, I read the comment section of the Europe was because there's so many people like that strategy and like a thing that is not real and it's used by the global. So this is serious again by the global release to make everyone eat parts and give it a fall. That's like a famous experience. But it's more like it's something that's going to appear at some point over. It's not very clear.
But you see it as a polarizing question, or potentially that could polarize the society in the future? Like, how do you?
Yeah, it's kind of like we're living in the same world that we want. It's kind of like we're in this parallel universe where that exists this way, and so it's not like right.
So it's not yet, right? It's just the topic which might at some point start something.
People are be smart. It's not in general.
Because maybe I could say from my perspective that there is like a division between at least those who use alternative transport and car owners. I mean, it's maybe related slightly to the climate change, but sort of you have these two groups which actually almost fight each other on the street. So it's kind of.
Yeah, also I think from this point of like alternative transport and car owners, I think the major polarizing factor in Moldova is also class, like and the aspiration to be middle class, the aspiration to be so it's this myth about like being wealthy, myth about being like aspired to be like among the elites that also drives this impulse to buy cars, to like never leave your vehicle, to only like that's why I think we have this like very interesting situation with the, for example, like third spaces, like or not particularly third spaces, but like cafes and restaurants. We have like cantinas, like and we have very fancy cafe and no middle ground, almost. Like and it's like this, I think a lot of people
Hostel and very expensive hotels.
Yeah. And like a lot of people are like on one hand they like poor people, they are a lot of people are disillusioned in like this like, capitalist state of being, and they channel their disillusionment into nostalgia, to like towards Soviet Union. They like, became more prone to Russian propaganda because of the it being the inheritance of the like, Soviet Union narratives and so on. But I think like I'm speaking, for example, about like the generation of my mother, and so it's like people who were born in 50s, 60s, and they lived a good like chunk of their lives in the Soviet Union, and a lot of them are just frustrated with this very neoliberal type of very aggressive capitalism that are going on here, and they don't know how to channel their frustration aside from the nostalgia towards Soviet Union. And I don't think that it's purely they're like absolutely and sometimes it's not that ideological, it's more like class driven. people are like either very poor, disillusioned, and they don't know what to do and where to go and like, how to, and they are also stripped of their identity and like the ways to actually change anything, because like out of the 30 years, like 33 years of corruption and like theft, basically, they like absolutely they have this like feeling that are like this belief system that they're not able to change anything, and they are just like start more and more to ruminate in this very word is not regretted, but reactionary, reactionary ideas. They kind of and they think that it's gotta be whole package. It's either and that's why like I think the 9th of May is very like telling, because like on one hand it's the memory of people. Like for a lot of people it's still a very like absolutely ideologically shaped, but still a part of their like family memory, family like stuff that like a lot of people are the children of. So like there's like less people who were like witness and participated fully because they're dying now, but like they're like, the children of those people are still alive, and still it's a whole like a big tragedy. But at the same time, it's either like constructed by like, nowadays Russia that are controlling the narrative like, around the 9th May and the Second World War. So yeah, there's no space for people to commemorate and to express their memory separately from the ideology. That's the thing that is, but like I think it's the relevant for almost all of the post-Soviet countries that are like driven by the still by the Russian forces.
I think it's also like what you mentioned, like this capitalism and neoliberalism is very isolating. Like it's a very individualistic belief. It's like, okay, if I have a car, if I have a TV, then it's fine, but it's always like connected to an exploitation of someone else. And I think it's also connected to like this loss of the belief in communities and what communities are capable of. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of very interesting points, yeah.
Wars that was local here was good take over here vendor days for people for the local. It was I think it was kind of over even with young people here. It still is I think where there was this whole thing where around the world there was this polarization around the feminism and this kind of anti-feminist online. So a lot of young people they can feel this anti-feminist algorithmic kind of content, and they just kind of have this. So I mean, more about feminism still, at least for young people, it's kind of like a whole point of conflict is rising conflict. Conflict is brewing and it's probably already manifesting itself.
But you mean because the conflict I think is more brought by patriarchy than than the new feminist tendencies.
No, I'm saying that the identity is the content online with traditional like everyday, like I don't know if they call it traditional, but at least they call themselves. So call it more like tradition, and all this fitness and people know English and that's the ones I know. I don't know much of Russian, just probably the Russian version of that, the Romanian version of that, or I don't know, there's a
So there is a lot of this type of content online.
and it's I know it's divided young people, like your roles or yeah, I unfortunately I have people that kind of was not welcome to me.
Yeah, the whole Instagram culture.
Yeah.
Do you think like things like incel culture or like this trad wife, you know, lifestyle, is it like a recent thing, or like has it emerged like in the last few years, or has it emerged like alongside like how it has, I guess, in the US and Western Europe?
Here specifically?
Yeah.
I don't really know, because I'm very deep in the bubble, and I'm sure when, but like I think the misogynistic views are like were very common thing that didn't really go anywhere. It's just like shaped differently. There's like I don't think that misogyny ever was not present. Really very different forms. Yeah,
So it's kind of maybe there was like I mean not maybe the world it's culture. But this guy I mean they basically promote violence against women and that's not something that we hear to be a lot. So they I mean so they kind of like justifying it, glorifying it, yes, that's this guy.
They took it to a more extreme, basically, or and then they went into popular media or not?
They're also Jorg part of this, maybe something, I don't know, here, because he had a lot of these figures on his platform, so he had a lot of this.
But like they penetrate also these public platforms or
Yes.
TV and so on.
yeah, but like in America, it's like all over Fox and Fox News and so on, like so. But in Moldova, I think mostly in like TikTok and YouTube and like
So
it's not necessarily
not public.
It's really right now.
The society.
Anybody has like of like 45, 50 plus. So,
Also, this guy, the Times is kind of anti. So this kind of hatred towards climate activists and this climate. From my perspective, I mean, it's like a lot of the Americans, they understand better English now. So we're kind of getting connected with this law of Anglophone and this cultural wars. So I mean, maybe and it's happening more on the young people first because they're more like they have better knowledge or better speak better English. And so I mean, from my perspective, it's like this conflict. But she's the right because I mean we have this attacks now with Germany. Politicians from the Green Party. So it's specifically they are targeting the group main party positions, and I think that's really they really connected with this unity, anti climate change, and they have a really huge presence online, like the left, like can't compare that's amazing, and that's the issue for me. I mean, more like the left is really too much. It's very from this real world means space like and yeah, so I think that's happening in more of the or let's have American European
Audience.
conditions here. They're happening in more of the like to see like very I don't know maybe what's wrong. Like I don't have that. So I mean, well, I'm sure what's happening. That's just what I hear, what I sense.
Would you be able to come next Saturday to join the workshop? Would you like to participate in this discussion in the future? No. Yeah,
At the same time,
also at 6, yes. Next Saturday, 6. Also here. But yeah, I think it's our first meeting and first presentation on this topic. It's not that it's a new topic, just maybe it's discussed constantly, but in different circles. But we try to